Hey y'all, I am shifting gears, so I am going to introduce myself again and get back into a different series. Certainly a rebel without a cause, and I should be riding the wave of my last viral video. And I am a creative human being, so I'm going to go where I want to go, not where the views are going, just because that's who I am. All right, so before we get started, I want to take a moment to properly introduce myself, especially for those of you who found this channel through the recent video, which was, let me pull it up. Why American Politics Acting Like Religion Signals Late Stage Empire. So, that is the most viral video I have ever had. I gained like 60 subscribers from it, and I certainly deeply appreciate all of you. So, my name is Heather, and this channel is called Underwater Panther. The work I do here sits at the intersection of astro-psychology, shadow integration, cultural cultural power dynamics. I explore how different generations, especially the millennials, were shaped by psychology, emotionally, and spiritually by the systems we grew up inside. That includes education, religion, media, music, relationships, authority, and identity. The reason the last video resonated so strongly is because it touched a real fracture many people are feeling right now: the collapse of moral authority, the confusion between belief and thinking, and the present pressure to outsource conscience to institutions or identities that no longer feel trustworthy. But that conversation didn't come out of nowhere. It's a part of a much larger body of work I've been building, particularly a millennial focused series that looks at how our nervous systems, values, and sense of meaning were shaped during a period of institutional breakdown and rapid cultural change. So, if you're new here, welcome. And if you've been here a while, thank you for staying with me as the conversation expands and contracts. I'm not here to tell anyone what to believe. I'm not interested in sides, tribes, or ideological performance. What I care about is discernment, how people arrive at meaning, how systems influence moral reasoning, and how we reclaim agency in a world that often rewards reaction over reflection. This video marks a return to that longer arc, not away from the recent conversation, but deeper into it. We're going to keep exploring what was lost, what adapted, and what can be consciously rebuilt, particularly for millennials who sensed something was off long before it had language. If that kind of inquiry resonates with you, you are in the right place, so let's continue. So I'm diving back into my millennial book. I had a specific request for the millennial generation breakdown. And so I've already done the silent generation, the baby boomer generation, and now I am revising. I've written this section probably 10 times now. I'm certainly more satisfied with it now, and I'm going to break this down into probably 2 videos for this section. I certainly wanted to do the music portion justice. I used to promote live bands. I would travel with them, make flyers, I would record videos and edit them and upload them on my old ass YouTube channel. It did go viral, but I ended up deleting it like a moron, but whatever. So this music section is definitely hitting me at home in the heart. So I certainly wanted to do it justice. I wanted to put language to something that I think many people understand, even, Gen Xers certainly understand. I ended up going out for New Year's. My freaking father called me, and he sounded like a teenager. It was absolutely hysterical. He called me and was like, "Oh, I took my old best friend out to, the bar." My uncle owns a bar locally here in town. And he's like, "We drove to the bar and I forgot my keys." I don't know how he drove his vehicle without his keys in it, but whatever. probably self-starter. Anyways, he locked himself out of the vehicle and they didn't have a ride. And so he called me and was like, "Hey, can you grab my keys from home?" And I was like, "Sure." It was New Year's and I was laughing. And so I brought him his keys and I ended up staying at the bar with a whole bunch of Generation Xers. They actually all grew up together. They went to high school together. I grew up with them, actually. They were all neighbors. We all lived right beside each other here in the country. It was so awesome. They ended up having a few live bands, and one of the bands were, I think they were from like an hour away or so, but they were younger kids and they rocked. And I absolutely love freaking music. I love going to concerts. I don't do it as much as I used to. Obviously, life gets busy and you work your ass off and you're a parent and it's just hard to find time for fun. And so I deeply, deeply enjoyed it. I love music and I love the fact that my very small town here is bringing music back into our space. And so there's many different places, including my uncle's bar, that are bringing live music back, and it is amazing. I love it, and so I want to talk about it. All right, so I am pulling from my book, so you can read along with me. I'm going to make my video smaller. I did capture a whole bunch of pictures to rotate between, but I just literally re-edited this book, so I really don't feel like screwing around with pictures. So I'm just going to leave a couple up here, and it is what it is. So it's getting late and I revised my book once more. So I'm good with it now, I think, and I will separate this into a couple different videos. So anyways, all right, so chapter opener, Millennial music. When music returns, people do too. Something subtle is happening in places that rarely make headlines. Small towns are bringing live music back, local bars are hosting young bands. Generations who don't agree on much anymore are finding themselves in the same rooms at the same time, listening to the same sound. Conversations soften, people stay longer, the atmosphere changes, and no one quite knows why. I I literally don't know anyone else framing this like I am, and it's seriously beautiful because I deeply, on a soul level and heart level, I understand people understand how important music is, like live music and experiencing it together. And but I just don't hear people framing it and explaining it like this. So I am so happy. I am happy to be able to do this. All right, so where was I? The atmosphere changes. So conversations soften, people stay longer, the atmosphere changes, and no one quite knows why. It isn't nostalgia necessarily, and it isn't just entertainment, it's regulation. Live music does something screens cannot replace. It gathers bodies into shared time. It synchronizes breath, rhythm, and attention without requiring explanation or agreement. It gives emotion a beginning, a middle, and an end. And in doing so, reminds the nervous system that it's safe to feel without performing. This is why people feel better in those rooms. Not because the music is perfect, but because it's finite, because it starts and stops, because everyone is there together. Meaning isn't curated, it isn't optimized, it emerges. For a generation raised during institutional collapse, and I will explain that later, and I do explain that throughout this book, this matters more than we've admitted. Millennials didn't lose their love of music. They lost music as a shared container, and I will definitely get more into what that means. What once synchronized communities slowly moved into private headphones, personalized feeds, and endless streams. Music became something you used to cope instead of something you entered together. So when live music returns, even quietly, even imperfectly, something deeper returns with it: memory, belonging, and coherence. The feeling of we were there instead of I consumed this. This chapter isn't about mourning what's gone, it's about recognizing what's trying to come back and why. So I will be kind of slowly editing as I go. I rewrote this just before I turned the video on, and I will be uploading this on my website. I literally always update sections of I've got like 30 books. I always tend to update them and then re-upload the latest version. All right, so I'm going to take a drink. All right, so music once synchronized by default. Historically, music didn't require effort to be shared. It synchronized people automatically. You didn't have to choose a scene, radio chose the moment. You didn't have to curate, albums arrived with structure. You didn't have to seek community. Everyone heard the same thing anyway. Concerts felt like pilgrimages because they extended an already shared emotional world. You arrived together because you'd already been listening together. Music wasn't just an event, it was a temporal glue. Even if you were alone in your room, you knew millions of others were hearing the same songs in the same order in the same era of their lives. That created shared reference points, shared emotional timing, and shared memory scaffolding. You weren't just a listener, you were inside a generation shaped soundscape. What changed for millennials? Millennials didn't wake up and stop valuing music. They inherited a world where shared timing fractured, release cycles accelerated, discovery individualized, and meaning detached from sequence. So music gradually stopped doing the automatic work of synchronization. It didn't disappear, it became optimal. Instead of music brings us together by default, it became music brings us together if we intentionally build a container. That is a massive shift. Concerts now are chosen, not given. This is why live music now feels either deeply sacred or completely irrelevant. There's less middle ground. When people go to concerts now, they're often seeking regulation, seeking presence, seeking embodied rhythm, and seeking what daily life no longer provides. That's not casual entertainment, it is repair. Small town bars, local bands, vinyl nights, backyard shows. These aren't throwbacks, they're counter movements. People rebuilding ritual where the default system no longer supplies it. From shared ritual, private coping, to intentional re ritualization. So the real arc looks like this. Number one, pre millennial era. Music synchronized society automatically. Ritual was ambient and collective. Number two, millennial transition. Music became portable, infinite, and personalized. Ritual collapsed into private regulation. Music became something you used to cope. Number three, current moment. People are rebuilding ritual deliberately. Live music resurges in pockets. Shared experience has to be chosen, not assumed. That's not loss, that is responsibility. But responsibility costs energy, and not everyone has it. This is why some people retreat into playlists, some numb out, some seek intensity instead of depth, and some start articulating what's missing and why it matters. So the key line here is millennials didn't stop sharing music. They lost the automatic cultural container that made sharing effortless and had to learn how to rebuild it by hand. That's why live music now feels either profoundly meaningful or oddly exhausting. Because ritual without infrastructure requires presence. And presence is work. I'm not saying music is dead. I'm saying music no longer holds us by default. We have to hold each other. Why does everyone feel louder? Why does everything feel louder, faster, and emptier? And yet, when we actually sit together, talk, and listen to music, it suddenly feels real again. That's not coincidence, that's containment re entering the room. When sound still had edges. So before playlists knew you, before algorithms followed your moods, before music became infinite and forgettable, millennials learned sound through effort. You waited for songs on the radio, you recorded them imperfectly, you rewound tapes, you skipped tracks by standing up, you carried cases of CDs like identity documents. Do y'all remember being in your car flipping through your huge ass binder of CDs? Like, it's hysterical. And when we didn't have GPS, we had to actually print from MapQuest, I think it was called. Yeah, and I also was the DJ. Like, I burnt CDs for everyone, every event, like promoting live bands, making flyers, filming videos, and editing them. God, those were the days. Those were the days. All right, so music required time, and then came the burned CD. Not a playlist, a declaration. You chose each song, you arranged them carefully, you listened through the whole thing to make sure it worked. You named it. You handed it to someone knowing it meant something because it cost you time. That mattered because it trained a generation in sequencing, pacing, emotional arc, effort as care, and containment as meaning. A burned CD ended, it allowed feelings to complete. Infinite streaming never does. Millennials miss authorship. They miss when meaning required effort. They miss when memory had limits. They miss when emotion wasn't optimized away. So, this chapter is not about sound. That will be the next. It is about what happens to the nervous system when rituals disappear and effort is replaced with endless access. All right, so the purpose here is to show how music train millennials' nervous systems for containment, effort, authorship, and emotional arc, and how the loss of those constraints mirrors the collapse of intimacy, meaning, and attention. When music asks something of you, before music followed you everywhere, it waited. You worked for it, you held it. Millennials did not grow up with infinite sound. We grew up with limits, and those limits taught us how to feel. Music lived in radios that played what they played, tapes that wore down. I like literally as a teenager, I used to have a whole bunch of girlfriends over, and we would act like a radio host. We would take our tape player, record, and like listen. We would record on tapes, and then we would act like we were a radio host. We would talk on the microphone. We would dress up and do music videos. Like, it is so much fun going back. It is so much fun sitting here. Like, I know I have that VHS somewhere. I'm gonna have to dig for it. Back when the Oh my god, I'm gonna have to dig through some stuff, my CDs and my VHSs. I need to actually get my VHS into a different format. Hopefully they're not ruined. It feels so long ago. Oh my god. Anyway, so you didn't just listen, you engaged. And engagement shaped regulation. This chapter is not about nostalgia necessarily. It is sensory history because the way a generation learned to consume music shaped how they learned to tolerate waiting, sequence emotion, complete experiences, attach meaning to effort, and let things end. What happened to music did not stay in music. So rituals millennials lost and what replaced them. So we were talking about the containers. What disappeared wasn't just formats. They were ritual structures that trained attention, emotion, and meaning. Burning CDs We went from burning CDs to infinite playlist. So we lost authorship, effort, and pacing and replaced it with passive consumption. Burning a CD was an act of intentional authorship. You chose the order, you thought about transitions, you limited the number of tracks because space was finite. You often made it for someone, which added care, vulnerability, and meaning. This process trained patience, emotional sequencing, and responsibility for experience. Infinite playlists remove authorship entirely. Now the order doesn't matter, nothing is at stake, and there's no beginning or end. The nervous system shifts from creator to receiver. That's not neutral, it trains passivity. Number 2, linear notes to artist branding. We lost depth, context, and story. Now, I want to know in the comments how many of you actually remember linear notes. I don't know if I'm even pronouncing that right. But linear notes were a quiet education and meaning. They told you who influenced the artist, where the music came from, what pain, place, or philosophy shaped it, who played which instrument, and why that mattered. You weren't just consuming sound. I keep going down too far. I apologize. You weren't just consuming sound, you were learning lineage. Artist branding replaces that with visuals, personality fragments, social performance, and engagement numbers. Linear notes were quiet education and meaning. They weren't flashy, they didn't demand attention, they asked for presence. You had to slow down enough to read them. You had to sit with the object, open it, hold it, turn it over. Meaning arrived through proximity, not performance. Linear notes taught you where the music actually came from. They told you who influenced the artist, not as branding, but as lineage. You learned which voices came before, which traditions were carried forward, which conversations the music was entering. This subtly trained the mind to understand creativity as relational rather than isolated. Art wasn't magic that appeared out of nowhere, it was inheritance. They told you where the music was made. Place matters, studios, cities, basements, bedrooms, regions. You learned that sound was shaped by environment, by weather, by culture, by economic conditions, by proximity to other musicians. This grounded art into reality. Music wasn't just emotional expression, it was situated experience. They told you what shaped the work internally. Pain, grief, love, obsession, spirituality, rage, and doubt. Sometimes explicitly, sometimes obliquely. But the notes signaled that music came from lived experience, not just talent. This normalized depth. It made emotional seriousness legible without turning it into spectacle. They told you who played what and why it mattered. You learned that music was oh no, my thing's glitching out again. You learned that music was collaborative, that one person's sound depended on another's timing. That texture came from relationship. This quietly countered the myth of the lone genius. Meaning emerged from coordination, not dominance. All of this mattered because you weren't just consuming sound. You were learning how meaning is made. Linear notes trained attention towards context, continuity, and contribution. They built an internal sense that art existed within systems, historical, relational, and emotional. You didn't just feel the song, you entered its world. Artist branding replaced that structure. Instead of lineage, you get visuals. Instead of context, personality fragments. Instead of story, performance. And instead of meaning, you get metrics. The artist becomes a surface rather than a portal. You don't step into a world, you scroll past a persona. The question shifts from where did this come from to how does this perform? The story didn't disappear, it got flattened into thumbnails, flattened into vibes, flattened into short captions and aesthetics that can be read instantly without effort or depth. This isn't because artists became shallow, it's because platforms reward legibility over complexity. Lineage doesn't scale well. Context doesn't monetize cleanly. Ambiguity doesn't convert. So depth gets compressed into signals. You don't enter meaning anymore. You signal alignment with it. Virtue signaling, does that ring a bell? You were the song. I just lost my spot. Talking shit. I'm going to take a drink break, actually. I literally put my shirt on backwards today. It's one of those days, and I don't even care. One of them days, but we're here. We're doing it. All right, so depth gets compressed into signals. You don't enter meaning anymore. You signal alignment with it. You wear the song instead of inhabiting it. You post a lyric instead of sitting with it. You reference the artist instead of learning their roots. Meaning becomes something you display, a marker of identity, rather than something that works on you slowly over time. This is subtle loss, not information, not creativity, but initiation. We have lost initiation in every freaking realm. It is absolutely crazy. I'm so happy I'm writing these books to understand it in every realm. It's really wild. All right, so linear notes didn't just explain music, they taught people how to relate to meaning itself. My hair is driving me insane. I haven't gotten my hair done in like 3 months, and I'm gonna get it done tomorrow. It's been a rough couple months, not gonna lie. Thank you for sitting with me and being here and marching on in life. And when the structure disappeared, meaning didn't vanish. It became performative, portable, and thin enough to carry without transformation. Number 3, that was a really long section. Number 3, radio countdown to algorithmic feeds. I feel like putting that on a whole nother page. It's annoying. All right, so number 3, radio countdown to algorithmic feeds. All right, so we lost anticipation and shared time and replaced it with individualized dopamine. Radio countdowns trained collective rhythm. Excuse me. Everyone waited together. Songs rose and fell over weeks. You experienced delay, suspense, and payoff. Cultural movements were shared, not personalized. That waiting was not trivial. It taught regulation. And yes, I understand that the radio is still a thing, but it's not a cultural thing like it used to be. So algorithmic feeds remove time entirely. Now everything is immediate. Everyone is in a different stream. Nothing is waited for, and anticipation collapses into impulse. Radio countdowns weren't just entertainment. They were a form of collective temporal training. Everyone waited together. Songs climbed slowly week after week. You learned that meaning unfolds over time, not instantly. There was suspense. There was payoff. A song reaching number 1 felt earned because you had lived with it on the way there. That shared waiting did something subtle but important. It regulated the nervous system. Anticipation taught patience. Delay taught tolerance. The rhythm of rise and fall created coherence between individuals. Not because everyone liked the same song, but because everyone occupied the same moment in time. Culture moved in sync. Algorithmic feeds remove time as a shared dimension. Who of you here seriously thinks time has sped up? Time is crazy, absolutely crazy. So that shared waiting did something. Okay, so I just said that. Shared dimension. Did I say that? I keep getting lost here. All right, so yeah. Now everything is immediate. Discovery happens instantly. Access is total. Each person lives inside a personalized stream that no one else fully shares. There is no collective buildup, no communal suspense, no shared now. That moment sometimes appears. It is either consumed or skipped, no waiting required. This feels empowering at first. Customization feels like control, but over time it trades coherence for convenience. Does that not align with our relationships nowadays? Without shared anticipation, the nervous system loses rhythm. Experience fragments into impulses instead of arcs. And when everyone lives in a different feed, culture stops happening together. Customization doesn't just personalize taste, it isolates timing. And timing is how human systems synchronize. Number 4, going from albums to singles to clips. We lost narrative coherence and replaced it with momentary impact. Albums were emotional architectures. I wanted to say archetypes. I'm so used to the psychology language here. All right, so we lost narrative coherence and replaced it with momentary impact. All right, albums were emotional architectures. They had arcs, tension, release, and themes that unfolded slowly. Listening front to back taught tolerance for discomfort, meaning through sequence, and trust in process. Singles fractured that, clips shattered it. Now meaning must land instantly or it is skipped. Swipe, swipe, swipe. I refuse. Absolutely refuse. All right. So that trains impatience with complexity and tolerance for ambiguity and preference for intensity over integration. Stories become sparks instead of journeys. Albums were emotional architectures. They weren't collections of songs, they were containers for experience. They had arcs, themes, tension, and release. Some tracks challenged you, some bored you at first, some didn't make sense until later. Meaning emerged through sequence, not immediacy. Listening front to back trained something rare. Trust the process. You stayed with discomfort long enough for it to transform. You learned that payoff often comes after confusion, not before it. That's not just musical training, that's psychological training. Clips shattered it completely. Now meaning has to land instantly or it disappears. A song must hook in seconds. A clip must spike emotion immediately. I just want to pause here and I am so freaking ecstatic that literally I think my last viral video is over an hour long. I know I keep talking about it, but I'm so happy. 59 minutes and 47 seconds, 1,400 views. I am so happy that there are people out there that still listen to long format lectures, long formats. These kids have no idea. I do actually have mostly millennials as my in my analytics on my YouTube. Yes, most of you are millennials, so it kind of doesn't surprise me. Thank you for being you, for real. Thank you for being you. All right, so there's no patience for slow build or subtle development. This doesn't make people shallow. It trains systems to reward intensity over integration. And that is literally what our relationships are nowadays. Freaking intensity. It's intense and then it fades and then it's over. And it's just so sad. The result is a cultural impatience with complexity. Ambiguity becomes intolerable. Stories sharpen, context disappears, everything becomes a spark instead of a journey. When narratives collapse, people don't stop craving meaning, they just chase it in fragments. Number 5, one song on repeat. We lost that to infinite skipping. I still play old ass music on repeat, Let me know if you do too. I'm definitely one of those people. And I listen to mostly old music, like, come on now. They just don't make music like they used to. Hear, hear. Cheers to that, right? All right, not really. All right, so one song on repeat. So we lost emotional processing and replaced it with stimulation avoidance. Replaying a song wasn't obsession, or was it? It was integration. You listened again because something was unresolved. An emotion needed metabolizing. Your nervous system was sinking to it. Repetition is how the psyche digests. Infinite skip interrupts digestion. The moment something stirs, I am doing more editing. The moment something stirs, you skip, distract, replace. Uh-oh, I lost my. And numb. We didn't lose emotion. We lost the space to stay with it. Replaying a song wasn't obsession, it was integration. You listened again because something hadn't landed yet, because an emotion needed time to move through you. Wallowing in the depths of despair. I've been listening to the same like 4 songs the last 3 days. Oh my god. Over and over and over, just wallowing in the depths. Because an emotion needed time to move through you. Because the nervous system was sinking to a frequency that felt unresolved. Repetition is how the psyche digests experience. Just like sleep consolidates memory. Yes, big one. Repetition consolidates feeling. Have you ever thought of that before? Sleep consolidates memory. Infinite skip interrupts that process. Now, the moment something stirs discomfort, sadness, longing, anger, grief, there's an escape hatch. Skip, change the mood, replace the feeling, avoid the descent. Emotion doesn't get metabolized, it gets bypassed. Over time, this trains avoidance rather than resonance, not because people are weak, but because the system rewards distraction over digestion. The space to stay with feeling disappears. And when feelings don't complete, they circulate, unresolved, ambient, and exhausting. Forever editing, forever editing. I've been like this my whole life. Uh-oh, what is going on? I'm having like lag. I'm having a lag. Hopefully my video's been lagging too. I live out in BFE, sorry. All right, so the thorough line containment. Each of these rituals provided containment. Containment means boundaries, sequence, limits, time, and shared meaning. What ties all of these losses together isn't nostalgia for a format. It's the loss of containment. I literally had to ask all the Gen Xers at the live show at the bar on New Year's. I literally had to ask them if they still, listen to tapes and CDs and what their own rituals were nowadays, and it's just totally lost almost. I get it. Convenience is nice. All right, containment is the invisible structure that allows experience to be felt without overwhelming the system. It's made of boundaries, sequence, limits, time, and shared meaning. Containment tells the nervous system where an experience begins and ends. It provides edges. It creates rhythm. It says this feeling has a place, a shape, and a resolution. When containment exists, the nervous system receives a simple but crucial message. You're safe enough to feel this. The safety doesn't come from comfort, it comes from structure. A song with a beginning and an end. An album that holds emotion in sequence. A shared countdown that synchronizes time. A repeated track that allows feeling to complete. These weren't just cultural habits, they were regulatory systems. I keep almost choking on my spit, sorry. Containment allows emotion to move through instead of flooding or fragmenting. It allows meaning to land instead of hovering unresolved. It allows identity to form gradually rather than defensively. When containment disappears, the system doesn't become freer, it becomes noisier. Without boundaries, simulation increases. Without sequence, attention scatters. Without limits, choice becomes pressure. Without time, everything feels urgent. Without shared meaning, experience becomes isolated and self managed. The nervous system left without external structure tries to compensate internally. And that compensation often looks like anxiety, hyperreactivity, moral rigidity, or identity fixation. This is why so much modern culture feels loud, reactive, moralized, and brittle. Not because people are weaker, not because they care too much, but because the containers that once held emotion, meaning, and belonging were quietly removed. And when containment disappears, meaning doesn't vanish, it gets outsourced. People hand it to ideology, identity, outrage, or algorithms because the nervous system still needs something to hold experience together. Moral certainty replaces moral process. Volume replaces coherence. Reaction replaces reflection. And I seriously think that's why my politics taking over the religious container, I think that's why that video hit so hard. I mean, people just don't really have the words for this. It's like a deep understanding, but it's hard to put words to this. So it's happening in every pillar of society. FYI. All right, so the nervous system always adapts to the environment it's given. If the environment offers rhythm, limits, and shared structure, people become more regulated, reflective, and resilient. If the environment offers infinite choice, constant stimulation, and no endings, people become anxious, fragmented, and reactive, no matter how intelligent or well intentioned they are. This isn't a failure of character. It's a predictable response to a world that removed containment and told people to self regulate in its place. And until we rebuild containers, cultural, relational, and internal, no amount of information, morality, or ideology will calm the system because regulation comes before meaning. All right, so this will be the last section that I do tonight. It's getting late. And then I will go into the technological timeline and the music timeline. So, emotion after the gatekeepers fell. All right, so before we talk about what was lost, it's important to name something that's still quietly happening. And I don't know, I probably should have. I'm thinking about moving this section again. All right, so people didn't stop loving music. They didn't stop gathering. They didn't stop needing rhythm, sound, and shared emotion. In fact, many communities are trying, often instinctively, to bring it back. So, like I said in the beginning, small towns are reviving live bands. So happy, so freaking happy. Local bars are hosting young musicians. Neighbors talk about music across generations. Concerts still feel electric when they happen. There's a reason for that. It's not nostalgia, it's the nervous system remembering something essential. Music once synchronized people. Concerts weren't just entertainment, they were collective arrival. Album releases were events that aligned attention and anticipation. Radio created shared emotional timing. People felt things together, even when they were physically apart. That mattered more than we realized at the time. What millennials lost wasn't music itself, it was containment. The structures that once held music as a shared ritual slowly weakened. As institutions fragmented, music shifted from something entered together to something managed alone. What had been collective, bounded, and time marked became intimate, endless, and self directed. Music didn't disappear, its role changed. It moved from the social regulation to private coping, from ritual to regulation, from shared rhythm to individualized use. And many people felt that loss before they could name it. Some responded by creating living. Oh, sorry. Hang on. I gotta tap that down. All right. Why is this freaking out? Some responded by creating live spaces, by promoting shows, by filming bands, by building scenes, by gathering people together without fully knowing why it mattered. Only that it did. That wasn't accidental. It was the body responding to an absence the mind hadn't yet articulated. This chapter isn't about blaming technology or romanticizing the past. It's about understanding what music was quietly doing for us, emotionally, relationally, and neurologically. And what happens when those containers dissolve? It adapts. And everything that follows, how we listen, how we bond, and how we regulate emotion, and how we carry meaning, grows from that shift. All right, so for most of the 20th century, music functioned as shared emotional structure. It was bounded by institutions, radio stations, record labels, album formats, and release cycles, and public platforms. Those boundaries weren't just economic or aesthetic, they shaped how emotion moved through society. Music had limits, it had timing, it had collective reference points, and within those constraints, feeling could be experienced together. When those gatekeepers fell, something subtle but profound happened. Music didn't disappear as an emotional force, it became more intimate, more personal, and more available. But it also became uncontained. What had once been collective, time marked, and externally structured became endless, individualized, and self managed. Instead of entering a shared emotional space, people began curating private emotional environments. Music stopped being something you stepped into together and became something you used to regulate mood, manage stress, soothe anxiety, or avoid discomfort. Listening became less about surrendering to a structure and more about controlling an internal state. This wasn't a moral shift, it was an adaptive one. So, as other institutions failed, churches, communities, stable work identities, shared civic narratives, music quietly absorbed emotional labor they no longer held. It became therapist, companion, ritual, background support, and emotional buffer. Millennials didn't turn to music because they were indulgent. They turned to it because they were increasingly alone with their nervous systems. But when emotion is managed privately instead of held collectively, something changes. Feelings lose shared language. Grief becomes isolating. Anger circulates without outlet. Joy becomes fleeting rather than anchoring. Bonding shifts from synchrony to proximity, from feeling the same thing at the same time to coexisting in parallel emotional worlds. This reshaped how millennials bonded. Music once created communal landmarks, songs that marked summers, breakups, protests, losses, and awakenings. When those landmarks faded, memory became less episodic and more ambient. Sorry, my thing's glitching out. Experience blurred. Emotion drifted instead of resolving. It also reshaped how life was processed. Without shared containers, emotion no longer had guaranteed endings. Songs flowed into one another. Playlists never stopped. There was always another track to adjust the feeling. Less catharsis, more modulation, less completion and more continuation. How many of you still make a playlist for each year? I started my 2026 playlist in December. Like, I still make playlists for the year. I'm not sure if younger generations even do that. I'm not sure. Can someone let me know? I need to ask. I need to do a survey or something. Yeah, I still make playlists for the year, and I still see music as certainly a timestamp in time. It is a thing. This is so wild to think about all this, isn't it? Music becomes endlessly present and endlessly unfinished. This didn't make millennials emotionally shallow. It made them emotionally responsible for everything. Regulation moved from culture into the individual nervous system. And while that allowed flexibility and personalization, it also increased fatigue, fragmentation, and longing for meaning that could be shared again. What was lost wasn't music. What was lost was the structure that allowed feeling to land, complete, and belong to more than one person at a time. And that loss quietly shaped a generation's relationship to emotion, intimacy, memory, and meaning long before anyone had language for it. All right, so I'm going to go through the 5 phases throughout time, how this changed over time, and then I'm going to cap this video. I'm almost at an hour. All right, so phase 1, music is shared container, 1980s through the early 1990s. Millennials were born into the last era of musical containment. Music had clear genres, clear stars, clear emotional limits, and institutional gatekeepers. Albums had beginnings and endings. Songs lived in time. Silence existed between tracks. Emotion was held by structure, not carried by the listener alone. You didn't use music to manage your inner state at this point. You entered a collective emotional field and felt alongside others. Music regulated socially, not privately. So I've been saying the word containment a lot, and I probably should have moved this section up towards the beginning. I sat on that for quite a while and I decided not to. So I am going to instead do this an hour in almost, which is kind of ridiculous. I think I did kind of explain containment quite a bit in the beginning, but I'm going to break it down a little bit more here just so you can understand. So there's 3 concrete structural changes that affect mental, emotional, and relational processing, not just tactile format, which I will get into in the next video. So what containment means here? Containment equals a bounded container that shapes how emotion is felt, shared, and completed. A beginning and an end, a shared rhythm, friction, some effort required, fewer options, so choices have weight. I can't. That's what's wrong with relationships today. It's just so, I don't know. I love technology, don't get me wrong, but I feel for the younger generations when it comes to technology and relationships because there's just endless choices, and it's really sad because people become expendable and what's the word I'm looking for? Expendable. I don't know, and thrown out. Really, it's just sad. All right, so when those disappear, emotion tends to become continuous, self-managed, less resolved, and more ambient. All right, so we're going to go through mental containment first, attention and sequence. So back then we had albums and radio, which we do still have radio, but it's not a cultural thing like it used to be. So we had fixed track order, which was a narrative arc. Limited skips, you stayed with discomfort long enough for the song to turn. I just got something in my mouth. One or few channels, shared reference points. Now we have streaming, infinite choice, instant skip. You exit discomfort immediately. Playlist fragment narrative, you get states instead of stories. Personalization isolates reference points. Fewer shared anchors. So the mental result is less deep sequencing, more state hopping, and less memory encoding because nothing is marked. Just like we don't do cursive writing anymore. I was so into calligraphy and cursive writing. I love cursive writing. All of these books I write in hand in cursive, and then I transfer to typing and then into books. Like, we have just lost so much. Lost. All right. So, anyway, that's memory encoding. That is also a form of memory encoding. Reading a physical damn book is memory encoding. Like, my sister is in college. She's about ready to graduate in psychology. Imagine that. But I was so excited. I was like, "Oh my god, can I like borrow some of your psychology books?" And she's like, "What books?" I'm like, "What do you mean, what books?" And she's like, we don't have books. We have them on an iPad." Oh my god. No. I'd be so pissed if I went to college and spent that much money and didn't have a physical book. I'd be so pissed, like, seriously. Jesus. I'm gonna take a moment of silence and screw up my screen while I'm at it. All right, so mental containment is the structure that allows attention to stay oriented long enough for meaning to form. In earlier formats, albums, and radio, attention was guided by sequence. Track order was fixed, which meant music unfolded as a narrative rather than a mood selection. You didn't just encounter a song, you traveled through it in relation to what came before and after. This trained the mind to follow arcs, tolerate uncertainty, and recognize progression. Limited skips mattered more than we realized. When you couldn't immediately exit discomfort, you stayed present long enough for the song to turn. Many songs only resolve after tension, musically and emotionally. That delay taught the nervous system that discomfort isn't failure, it's a part of transformation. Add to this the fact that there were only a few major channels, radio stations, MTV rotations, and you had shared reference points. Everyone knew the same songs at roughly the same time, which anchored memory and meaning socially. Streaming reverses all of that. Infinite choice paired with instant skipping trains the mind to exit discomfort immediately. Playlists fragment narrative into emotional states rather than stories. You don't follow a journey, you sample a feeling. Personalization further isolates reference points. Everyone is in a different musical universe, shaped by opaque algorithms rather than shared cultural rhythms. Y'all, do you know anyone else talking about this stuff? The mental result is subtle but profound. Less deep sequencing, more state hopping, and weaker memory encoding. Nothing is marked as significant because nothing has boundaries. Without beginnings, middles, and ends, experiences don't consolidate into memory, they blur. Number 2, emotional containment, catharsis versus modulation. Then we had album or mixed. Mix had emotional pacing. Mixes. Build, peak, and release. Repetition over time. Same songs produced catharsis and meaning layering. Silence between tracks allowed feelings to land. Now we have streaming often functions like emotional HVAC, constant adjustment. You regulate by switching tracks instead of metabolizing the feeling. No silence, no ending. Less completion and more drift. Emotional result, less catharsis, more modulation, soothing without resolution, fewer chapters closed moments. Emotional containment is what allows feelings to rise, peak, and resolve. Albums and albums and carefully made mixes were emotional architectures. They had pacing, built intensity, and release. Listening over time to the same songs layered meaning. A track changed as you changed. Repetition wasn't stagnation, it was deepening. Silence between tracks mattered too. Those gaps allowed emotion to land, integrate, and complete. God, this is such a good song. I finally got my mic software downloaded, and so I'm listening to myself, making sure my audio works, but I have to, like, pair that with music cause yeah, we need balance. Alright, so where was I? Alright, I'm gonna skip ahead a little bit. The emotional result is less catharsis and more modulation. People get better at smoothing feelings without resolving them. Fewer experiences feel finished. Fewer chapters close. This leaves the nervous system perpetually in process but rarely integrated. And number 3, relational containment, shared culture versus private nervous system management. Then we had radio and MTV, and fewer releases created collective emotional events. Burning CDs was intimacy and infrastructure. I made this for you equals curated self disclosure with boundaries. You gave someone a finite object with a beginning and an end. It could be replayed and referenced with a shared narrative. Now you send a link, it's infinite, disposable, and non-ritualized. Algorithmic feeds replace for you curation with for engagement. People don't meet inside the same musical world as often. Relational result, fewer shared emotional landmarks, less intentional vulnerability exchanged, and music becomes more solitary regulation than communal bonding. Relational containment is how emotion becomes shared meaning rather than private regulation. When radio and MTV dominated, fewer releases created collective emotional events. Songs didn't just belong to individuals, they belonged to moments, generations, and shared timelines. You could reference a track and know someone else had lived inside it too. Burning CDs was an intimacy infrastructure. It wasn't casual, it was curated self disclosure with boundaries. You chose what to include and what to leave out. You handed someone a finite object with a beginning and an end. It could be replayed, remembered, and returned to. That created a shared narrative space where meaning accumulated. Now, sharing music often means sending a link, an infinite disposable object with no ritual. Algorithmic feeds replace for you, curation with for engagement optimization. People are less likely to meet inside the same musical world because everyone's feed is different, constantly shifting, and non durable. The relational result is fewer shared emotional landmarks and less intentional vulnerability exchange. Music becomes less about bonding and more about solitary nervous system management. What once connected people now often isolates them, quietly, efficiently, and without anyone noticing that what was lost. All right, so I'm going to cap this video here. Next, we are going to get into the tactile, mental, and relational. And then we will go through the actual technological evolution. And so, yes, I'm exhausted. We're an hour in. And, anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I certainly am all about talking about nervous system regulation and containment and how institutions have collapsed, especially with the millennial generation. We grew up in a whole different world and inherited a quite different one as we aged. And it's just, I think it's important to look back and give language to how we got here. And yeah. Anyways, hopefully you like this video. Feel free to write your thoughts and feelings. I certainly am excited to see the comments on this video. And yeah, thank you for all the late subscriptions. That means the absolute world to me. And I will see you in the next video.